Let's get centered. This week, special guest Stuart Elliott, a former columnist for the New York Times, joins us for a fascinating conversation on the new realities of advertising and the madmen of the digital age. Plus, the plot thickens as Trump authorizes covert CIA action in Venezuela. I'm Louis Miranda alongside Carl Meacham and Jeremy Murphy. Thanks for joining us today. The thing about One Hit Wonders is that you might remember the song but not the artist or band behind it. That's how I felt this week looking up who sang Video Killed the Radio Star, the very first music video to air on MTV when it launched in 1981. The nostalgia hit when news broke that MTV would be shutting down its music channels, where they actually still play music, in the UK and parts of Europe by the end of the year. Industry analysts expect that contraction to continue. Though MTV will still exist through Paramount's streaming service in the US, and the main channel will keep airing god-awful reality television and celebrity content, plus, of course, its Video Music Awards, the brand itself is pulling back from the rest of the planet and disappearing as a driver of American pop culture around the world. It's a sign of the times.
For me, it was all about 120 minutes. I mean, at the beginning, Michael Jackson was big, right? And that was played over and over again, beginning of the 80s or mid 80s. And then it was all about 120 minutes. And to me, that show was everything. I discovered bands like Bad Brains and Fishbone and the Smiths and Living Color. And it was this strange mix of punk and funk and alternative that later blew up, into Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit. And then for me, it was like Rage Against the Machine, which is my favorite band. But anyway.
Sure, I grew up watching Kurt Loder. Rock the Vote was a big part of it. Of course, Headbangers Ball and Yo MTV Raps.
Beavis and Butthead was huge too. But yeah, for me it was that.
Well, MTV really never survived the on-demand world. MTV played what they wanted to, and they would look at, what do our viewers want through 800 phone lines, mail. But, in this age where we can watch what we want when we want it, MTV was not ready for that. And they went their reality route, but that's just a garbage can. And most of it has nothing to do with their sole purpose of music television. I just don't think they ever survived the YouTube satellite radio, going online and just watching what you want when you want. And then the sad thing is, though, MTV is kind of how we discovered new artists. I mean, they were first to play Guns N' Roses and, the hair metal from the 80s. And now if people are going to just watch what they want to watch, and they're not going to have that window to look at new stuff.
But Jeremy, it was like you had to know the song, but you had to know the video. Right. And everybody would talk about the video. And I remember, do you remember the Thriller video was like on all the time?
Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll.
Now, of course, MTV's diminishing role comes as several different things are happening in similar fashion. MAGA's America First insular nationalism is cutting off America from the rest of the world. Unlike prior decades when America was the example, plenty of regions are happy to shape their own culture-defining platforms and economies. That's why Trump's tariff war is a losing strategy, and the technology boom that the US has led over the last 3 decades, including, of course, the growth of the internet, social media, and now AI, could be dominated by other countries in the near future. And especially now that the Trump administration is alienating international students who have played such a big part of that. When you look at so many of our major tech companies and the role that immigrants have played, and specifically many who came here on student visas, got the best education in the world, and then they built companies here. They helped build companies here in the United States. We're not going to have that anymore. So we couldn't ask for a better guest to help us talk about the changing times than former New York Times advertising columnist Stuart Elliott. Stuart, thank you for joining us.
Good to talk to all of you.
Stuart, we're really glad you could join us. You've written at length about the massive shift that the advertising industry has undergone as Madison Avenue gave way to Silicon Valley. That shift from analog to digital that entirely changed how companies and brands advertise. Tell us about that shift and how we should be thinking of it for what might be next as AI takes over.
Even now, for instance, in the podcast industry, the whole idea now seems to be shifting toward video podcasts, which wasn't something on anybody's radar screen a year or two ago. So even some of the newer media and newer ways of communicating are undergoing the same disruption and destruction that they themselves had reaped not that long ago on more traditional media. The basic gist of it is that the advertising follows the media, which follows the people. And in some cases, you had innovative forms of communication introduced, and people adopted them. In other cases, they were introduced and took a while for people to adopt. But each cycle gets more amplitude, if that's the word, and then leaves in its wake the legacy media, and they have to change and adapt. And now what's happening is, unlike other periods, some of the legacy media is actually starting to go away, whereas in the past, like when television was introduced in the 40s and 50s, it really affected radio tremendously, but radio adapted and turned more to music and talk. This time around, like for instance with the newspaper industry, the newspapers aren't adapting, they're dying, they're ceasing publication, and that has a lot of ramifications for advertisers, because the advertisers are looking for the consumers, the eyes and the ears, and they seek to put their money where they can get the most bang for their buck. But now that seems to be changing more frequently, more often. Yeah, hi.
Stuart, I've known you for probably 20 years now. And your column in the New York Times was really like you weren't anybody until you made your column. And you were such a great writer, and you had your finger on the pulse of the whole media and marketing industry. I guess my question is, if you're an advertiser, with fragmentation, where do you go to get the eyeballs? Because television used to be it. I remember when I was at CBS, an episode of CSI would do 30 million viewers. Now they're lucky to get 3 million. Where does an advertiser go?
Well, they're going now, obviously online, and they're going to podcasts and video, short form video, like TikTok. And in a lot of cases, they're doing a lot of communication to consumers directly through influencers on social media. And it's a matter to them. I mean, they're technically agnostic as to what platform they use. Their goal is to just reach the right people with the right message. And in a lot of ways, they're happy. If you could say that giant corporations can be happy and have emotions, they definitely are happy that they can now target their spending and their messages much more precisely than they used to do in the days when mass media were much more prominent. But on the other hand, there are all sorts of issues now with measurability and reliability of the data. So in a lot of cases, they're reduced to complaining. The old saying from 150 years ago, supposedly attributed to the guy who invented Lever Brothers. He said, or John Wanamaker. Sometimes they say, he says, half my advertising spending is wasted, only I don't know which half. And I think you're finding that the same issue is plaguing the advertisers today, even though there are many, many more ways for them to get much more targeted and bear down on the consumers.
the other thing that's happened, Stuart, is that you have two companies, essentially Google and Meta, well, now Amazon. They control the majority of advertising revenue on these digital platforms, which is something new. But the agencies are still thriving, right? And so what does that mean? And especially now that AI, essentially, it seems like the new model with ChatGPT and other platforms is that they're not even going to actually go to the websites or the places where content originates. They just feed it directly to the user. Are we seeing a maybe that the Google and Meta and Amazon dominance of advertising is also waning?
Mm, well, it's certainly early days now with the AI and its impact, which is probably going to be vast, or as the joke goes, maybe half vast. But the concentration of that power is really startling because for the number one worldwide advertiser right now is Amazon, and they spend something like $30 billion, $20 billion a year on advertising worldwide. And for decades, the biggest advertiser used to be either Procter and Gamble or Unilever, and that would be like maybe $2 or $3 billion in spending annually for them. So the other issue, of course, is that the traditional advertising agencies, which have been pretty much able to maneuver their way through these increasing series of changes, now they're beginning to start to encounter some issues. And for instance, you might have seen that there is one of the giant advertising agency conglomerate groups called Omnicom is now acquiring a second similar conglomerate called Interpublic. And the resulting combination will probably mean that there will be fewer actual agencies as they go through their portfolios and decide what are the more powerful and more effective brands by which to go into the marketplace. And some of these giant agency conglomerates have already started to do that. A group called WPP used to have 4 worldwide agency networks, but they're now collapsing them down so that there's only going to be, I think, 2. And that has a lot of effects, obviously, on the industry, its employment, the idea that kids, when they think about what they want to do when they grow up, this may become far less of a appealing choice for them. And again, as you mentioned, the idea that people who have the money, the advertisers, that they could reach out directly to the consumers or do it through an influencer or a social media celebrity who would charge a fraction of what a giant ad agency would to create some kind of a campaign, it has profound implications.
Stuart, I have a question. What does the loss of that communal experience, how does that play out in the ad world and in general society? I remember as a kid, you'd watch the Cosby Show, and then the next morning you'd come into school and you'd talk about it, and everybody saw the same thing at the same time, and that was really special. It really connected us. Now people are watching when they want to watch. No one's really watching the same thing you are. And that I think that's going to have effect on society because it kind of separates us.
Yeah, absolutely true. It's happening already. The common bonds that we shared in terms of socialization and media consumption, that's all changing. Those are all been blasting away, and now you've got maybe the only real true glue that connects people in a more aggregate way now is live sports. You'll still get an enormous number of people watching the Super Bowl here in the U.S. every year, and in fact, the number after it has been increasing in the last 2 or 3 years, although some people believe that's because of more effective measurement of the streaming viewership and the viewership in groups like in bars or clubs.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've certainly lost something in the way that we can't all have some sort of frames of reference that we can easily share with each other. But, you're going to get to the point where young people who will have grown up without that at all will not even know what they're missing. We're nostalgic for those glorious days when we could all talk the next morning at school or at work about what we just seen. But the younger people today, they're not gonna miss what they don't know they're missing.
Yeah.
Well, they don't even make eye
society, I
contact.
Right now, you've got so many fraying ties, and so many people are sort of going into their own corners. They're consuming their own media, they're consuming their own facts, and the sort of mass communications via advertising. You can make a lot of complaints about what it did and how it made people buy things they didn't want or didn't need and all that. But there was some glue there. It was glue that was connecting people, and it's rapidly going away, except for, like I said, live sports.
And is the advertising industry also worried on the production side? I mean, the one thing is the agency placement and the buy side of it, but the other side is just the production. And one thing is influencers making low cost productions, but now it seems that you can also get ChatGPT and Google's new video platforms are creating videos that are almost impossible to tell that they're not AI. And essentially anyone can become an advertising production powerhouse if they wanted to. How are folks seeing that?
Yeah, in the same way that the Hollywood studios are worried that anybody can become a Hollywood studio. Everybody who has or had some hand in the idea of producing content or whether it was sponsored content or original content or non-sponsored content is worried. They're staying up at night now because of the abilities that AI in particular are going to offer to the common, the decentralized person who can just do all this on their own. I mean, the advertisers for decades were arguing among themselves whether they should create their own in-house agencies. And with some few exceptions, they all decided, well, no, we need professional help. We need somebody on the outside who can come in with a fresh pair of eyes and tell us, oh, you shouldn't have this brand as your big consumer vehicle. You should use this other brand, or this nice grandma that you've been using in your advertising all these years is old-fashioned now. And even though she's the chairman's grandma, you should send her out to pasture. That's going to go away, or has started to go away, and everybody's going to be able to do this on their own, and that could mean hundreds of thousands, if not more, of jobs and evaporating into the mist. And unless there's some counter trend of people realizing that they're going to need professional help to do some of these things, we're looking at really profound changes that could be starting to happen very soon.
Hey, Stuart, I have a question for you. This is Carl. This is great. Great hearing you. How does authenticity survive in this situation? Everything is now dictated by algorithms. they dictate what we see. And second, I think you've alluded to some of it. Younger audiences, are they ever going to connect emotionally with brands the way it's happened in past generations? Or is that sort of framework done?
Well, that I would say that your two questions are sort of related to each other. I think that authenticity is going to become a vanishing commodity, which could make it even more valuable if the advertiser or the content creator is able to make a case that what they're selling or what they're talking about is special and unique and has some value. And the idea that younger people won't be able to tell the difference between something that's genuine and authentic and something that, through the magic of technology, can simulate that is a big question. But I think in some cases you're seeing that even as, like, say, influencers have the ability to put new brands in front of consumers, in front of the public. There's a big movement, obviously, what they call direct-to-consumer brands that have been created, like Vuori and a lot of cosmetic brands that have sprung up from nowhere. If there's those can be filtered via whether people feel they're authentic or not, even if it's a brand that was created 20 minutes ago. So I think that those kinds of qualities are still going to be in demand and will make a difference. It's just that they're going to be judged in an entirely different kind of way that I don't think a lot of people on Madison Avenue or even Silicon Valley are aware of yet.
For television, we talk a lot about politics, and politicians running use television. I mean, that was the majority of what they raised went into TV commercials. How has this changed for politicians advertising on television? Where do they go if they can't reach that mass audience?
Already you're seeing the rise of politicians and candidates who are becoming very skilled in reaching would-be votes directly through social media, like Mondani here in New York City. There's a candidate who's running for the Democratic nomination for the Senate in Maine who wants to face Susan Collins, who's gaining a lot of traction because of what Carl was saying. He's being perceived as authentic and real. He's a non-politician type. He seems to be resonating already, having raised a lot of money in a very short time since he announced his candidacy. I think in some ways it's probably going to be better for these candidates that television advertising becomes less of a force in their efforts to get elected, because the wear-out factor has become something that is really annoying the would-be voter. Here in the New York area, we're getting an enormous number of TV commercials for the New Jersey governor's race. And it's to the point now where there isn't enough advertising time for all the money that's sloshing in. And during the commercial breaks, you'll see a commercial for the one candidate, and it's immediately followed by a commercial from the other candidate that is demolishing the previous message that you watched a second ago. The fact that you're going to be able to reach people on their devices or more directly may actually benefit candidates in the long run.
Yeah, just look at the size of Kamala's losing campaign budget. 1.5 billion burned in 15 weeks, an average of about 100 million per week, give or take. Advertising was the bulk of that, maybe 600 million or so on producing and buying TV and digital ads. That, to their credit, the Kamala campaign actually did increase the share of digital significantly over prior campaign cycles, but hundreds of millions still got dumped on television. What's your advice to political campaigns on how to deal with advertising's new realities and these gigantic dumps on television that's largely starting to lose effectiveness?
I think that they're coming to the conclusion that they need to change how they reach out to potential voters. But at the same time, there's still a lot of older voters who are still consuming television and other traditional media. And you don't want to go turn that off altogether, turn off that spigot, and not be able to reach them in the way that they prefer to be reached. Somebody was saying the other day that candidates are going to have to be sort of jacks of all trades. They're going to have to be able to know how to make an effective TV ad to reach those people who are still doing that, and also know how to advertise much more skillfully on using the new media, and then also be able to have a message that you can put out there yourself through your own devices, so to speak. And Mondami is a perfect example of that. He has some incredibly clever and interesting and provocative messages, and they're going out in all different ways. The videos, I see them online. You can see them on your phone.
Yeah.
He's also doing TV commercials. He does a lot of stuff on TikTok that are, I guess they're ads. You could call them ads, but they're him talking, and then he's doing events. He did a scavenger hunt of all things a few weekends ago here in New York and got a lot of attention for that. And I think this weekend, he's doing some kind of a giant football game or soccer game that he's inviting people, I guess, to some different parks in different boroughs. So there's somebody who's doing it, in real time while we're chatting.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, he's 33 years old, and this is how he thinks, and he probably doesn't know any other way to do this, and it's having an impact because Andrew Cuomo, every time he does what he does, which is what he's been doing for 20 or 30 years, it reinforces the Mamdani message that Cuomo is out of touch and from a previous generation.
Yeah. Stuart, I know we're running up on your time here. Would love just one final impression from you. We talked about on this platform sometimes about the ads that are breaking through. We did a segment on the Batman versus Bateman ad that State Farm has been running because we thought it was brilliant. And so there is some fun stuff that's still coming out of the advertising world. We're curious what you think is, and I think the insurance industry has probably some of the best stuff, but what is a clever advertising campaign that stands out to you that creative brands could still learn from right now?
I think that's the insurance world. I mean, I remember when the whole movement began, like 15 or 20 years ago, where the companies, particularly Geico, which was sort of the pioneer of this, started to revolutionize this idea that what they call a low interest category, something like that you hardly ever think of, like insurance, can be made to be interesting and appealing if you approach it in different ways. And they were pioneers in that they would have, at the time, they had 5 or 6 different commercials on the air all at once, and each one had a different sell and a different approach, and they got noticed for that, and they also vastly increased their spending. And now you have State Farm and Allstate and Progressive and Farmers and a number of others. Liberty, that's the one also that's really been probably the most faithful follower of Geico in terms of doing the different types of ads and doing them both in traditional media and elsewhere.
Yeah.
And the creation of the characters. I mean, you can go all the way back 100 years to advertisers that created characters, and now you've got Jake from State Farm and the Gecko and Flo and all these other mascots, brand mascots, that are still breaking through to people, partly because they just spend so much damn money to do that, but partly because people find it appealing, the humor and the variety of it.
Yeah, I got to tell you, my daughter was making fun of me this weekend because I was cracking up every time the Liberty Mutual ad came up where the Limu runs onto the sports field and the guy then gets tackled by security. And I just could not stop laughing at it.
And my favorite one now is this new one that they have with the Limu limo.
Yes.
And if you think about it, I mean, it's totally ridiculous, but it's memorable. It's funny. They've done 5 or 6 different versions of it, and at the same time, they're running their other ads too. So
Yeah.
They still find a way to make an impression.
But Stuart, thank you so much for your time. Glad we could make it.
Me too. It's good to talk to him and good to talk to all of you. I really enjoy it.
Thank
you, Stuart.
Just to follow up, Stuart was saying about
Yes.
reaching, television is still important because it reaches older viewers, and old people are the ones who actually vote. So a lot of efforts put into young people, but they really aren't moving the needle as so much. But I remember at CBS, if you owned a station in a swing state, it was like printing money. Like we owned KYW in Philadelphia, and I forgot the other one in Pittsburgh. They're like ATMs during elections. We owned one in Florida, Miami, WFOR, and those states are, and a lot of money is going to continue to go into that. I don't think we're seeing the digital shift as fast as people say. I think television is still a very, very powerful medium for politicians.
Yeah, but if people lose money, like you're saying, Jeremy, or what it meant, it meant a lot of money to you to have those local subsidiaries, right?
Yes.
They're going to make an adjustment to make up for the losses. They're not going to lose money.
They will, but a lot of times you buy time, and so if you're a station, time is precious. There's only so much airtime available, and so that the candidates start competing with each other on how much airtime they can get, and the rates go up. And it used to be by law, stations had to give candidates a certain free time, or the lowest possible price. But what the stations did, they're like, okay, we could do that, but if you want to guarantee that it's non-preemptive, you can pay this.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just a matter of who's buying what time and how much. Oh no, this candidate bought like 4 hours of time. We can't have that. We're going to buy 5 hours of time. I think that's still in play.
Yeah.
Now let's turn to news that the Trump administration has authorized covert CIA action in Venezuela. I think this was season 2 of Jack Ryan on Prime, by the way. But yeah, Julian Barnes and Tyler Pager reported for the New York Times that the CIA has been secretly authorized for covert action in Venezuela as part of an intensifying pressure campaign on authoritarian leader Nicolás Maduro. The president himself said on Wednesday that he's considering strikes on Venezuelan territory. Carl, we talked about Colombia last week and how it's inserting itself. We've heard perspectives from past episodes from former Ambassador John Feely and from Eric Farnsworth. They didn't think it would go that far, especially because Venezuela, it's not like Panama in the way that, you saw in 1989 when the U.S. military went after Manuel Noriega in Panama. What are you hearing from your contacts in the foreign affairs space and in the region?
It feels like this leak was deliberate. I think it signaled that they're going to do something as far as the use of force, right? A signal meant to project resolve without formally escalating, right? From the Trump administration's perspective, I think this isn't about a process. We always talk about what the right process would be and who the right checks would be. It's about deterrence and it's about control. They believe that Maduro and his circle only respond to force, not norms, not diplomacy, and that signaling consequences to their actions is the only language that'll work. So due process, which is one of the issues that we've talked a lot about as far as, these taking out these drug boats in the Caribbean, it becomes secondary. It's just showing that I think the president wants to show that impunity has its limits and that there's consequences. Another thing that's really interesting, Luis, is that Maria Corina Machado, the Nobel laureate now, right, fits into this moment very clearly. But a lot of folks want her to speak up, and she's really being restrained. And a lot of folks are interpreting this as her being restrained about her alignment with Washington. But it actually might be a calculation, an effort to keep the U.S. engaged without losing credibility at home. I think she's walking an extraordinarily narrow line. She's trying to advance a democratic transition in a space defined by coercion, fear, conflict that we're seeing. And the nuance that she's sort of implementing is getting lost. But anyway, Venezuela I think there's more to come on Venezuela. And I think, this might be one of these situations where we end up, it's a game of chicken. Who's going to go first?
Well, I'll tell you, I think Trump ordering the military to blow up these boats it's playing very well.
Yeah.
And because it's a president taking action and doing something, and it's you can see on camera what's happening. And, for years it was just say no. And then the opiate crisis, nothing worked before. Maybe, you have He-Man now as president and he's doing something. And I think that registers with people.
Again, it's the same thing.
But Jeremy,
we're discussing before. It's the same thing. The American public sees him as doing something, Jeremy, and I think you said it.
Yeah.
But I think it's a short-term gain for a long-term problem, because if you actually have Trump going into Venezuela, if it turns into something much uglier, I think, Feely and Farnsworth had talked about the realities of the country. It's not like taking over Panama. This is a very different country with very different dynamics, different armed groups that can potentially, either get involved or at least create problems. This is not potentially a cakewalk, and this is a president who campaigned on and who has been running on being the peace president and talking about how he's ending wars, starting a conflict that could potentially end up with some scenes that he's not anticipating. I think could be turned against him in the end.
Yeah,
well,
but I don't
Sorry.
think it would be a traditional confrontation, Luis. I think it'd be much more like, the targeted operation against Soleimani in Iran, which was, meant to signal consequences and disrupt the regime, the inner circle of the regime. So when you think about people like Diosdado Cabello or Vladimir Padrino, those are the kinds of names that circulate in discussions about accountability. And, I don't think the United States is going to be involved in sort of this traditional confrontations with Venezuela. I think it would be much more targeted.
And also, there's no sympathy for boats trafficking drugs. That's not a rallying cry. It's very easy to say I'm doing something.
Well, let's be honest. But even Rand Paul is making clear, like the law enforcement side of this, there's no guarantee that those boats are actually who he says they are.
Well, right. We don't know with exactitude, right? But again, as far as a deliverable here at home, particularly with Florida, your home state, Luis, I think you're finding a lot of resonance, particularly with the Venezuelan diaspora, that I think was mad because of issues of TPS and immigration, but see this as or at least Trump sees this as a way of feeding them something.
Agreed.
I think part of the problem is that there's a lack of credibility on the part of what the Trump administration is doing, and the lack of transparency is only going to make that much harder, because this isn't just about the lack of transparency that Republican Senator Rand Paul is raising about the fact that there's no proof that these boats or that the individuals on them are actually narco traffickers. That's an issue that Senator Rand Paul, a Republican, has been raising, that there's a due process issue here. As Carl pointed out, and as he said last week, it's something that probably is falling flat with the American public, but it's important. And especially as we see DOD also try to go around the press. The other thing that happened this week that is absolutely crazy is that the Pentagon tried to get all the media outlets that cover the Pentagon to sign a pledge that they would basically not report on anything, that they're basically not spoon-fed. That is absolutely crazy. Look, Jeremy, you've been a flack on the corporate side. I've been a flack on the government side at DHS and at the White House. And the reality is, we get reporting all the time that we don't like, and we have tough arguments with reporters. I can't tell you the number of times that I've had heated arguments with either a reporter or going over their heads to talk to their editors, and pushing back on stories that sometimes got it wrong. Sometimes we just disagreed with the framing, and those are legitimate arguments to have. Like, I'm not suggesting that the Pentagon under Hegseth or anyone else should simply accept that any story that runs is accurate. Like, that's the whole point of freedom of the press, is that they get to report and you get to argue with them when you disagree, and push back. And sometimes that results in tweaks or changes. Sometimes it doesn't. But that's the system that allows for a free press to operate. And part of the reason there was already a crackdown on freedom of the press during the first Trump term, but what we're seeing now is just beyond the pale. And I have to say, I'm glad that the major news media organizations refused to sign that pledge, and that they're holding strong. Because here's the thing. You're not going to be able to get legitimate journalists to stop reporting and to stop talking to their sources and to stop digging into information, because that's what they do. And the government, even when you have a what you think is one party control, it doesn't matter. Your stuff is going to get out, and that's why transparency and working with the press in a constructive way is the way to do it, because the information is going to get out anyway. And you'd rather be able to work with journalists even when you disagree, or even when you're arguing about how they see a particular issue. I think it's shameful. Jeremy, I'm curious for your thoughts as someone who also argued with press for many, many years.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Fox News even refused to sign, which I think the only people who signed is the OAN network, which is like Trump TV. I think it's great because, they need the legitimate press. They need the AP. They need all the networks. And I think something like that would work against them too, because if you're not giving reporters official access and statements or whatever, if you're gonna just drown them out and just blacklist them or whatnot, media is going to rely on sources. They have sources, and that's how they're going to get their information, not from officially. They're going to dig deeper and deeper and deeper just to get news, and that doesn't help the Pentagon. So I think this is going to blow up in their face. I think it already has. When you have one network agreeing to this, I don't see how they win on this.
Yeah. It's also part of a broader, very disturbing pattern that this administration has. Its trend towards authoritarianism. It also doesn't make sense with President Trump, because if you have somebody who's been media friendly, who just brings media along everywhere and talks to everyone, it's Donald Trump. It's how he made himself a local celebrity in New York, that enabled him to then turn that into much broader aspirations. It's because he was always willing to call a reporter, even when he was using a fake name and pretending to be his own publicist. Yep. Do you remember his name?
Oh, John something. He would pretend to be a publicist when it was really Donald Trump.
It was really him calling on behalf of himself. Yes. And so the fact that media hungry president is trying to shut down media is weird, but it's also dangerous, and it's part of a broader trend towards authoritarian rule that we also saw unfold at a press conference this week, where it was a bizarre setting with Attorney General Pam Bondi, the FBI Director Kash Patel, Bondi's senior deputy, who was also Trump's personal attorney. And basically what they were doing was to say, Donald Trump telling them that he wants them to go after his political enemies, even naming some of them. It's going down an ugly path right now.
Well, I do think a lot of it is showmanship. I think the Secretary of War now, or the Defense Department, I think he did this just to ingratiate himself to Trump. I think it's complete just theater. Everybody knows this is never going to hold, but it looks good to the president. And the president's so funny. If you have a switchboard and you tell him 9 out of 10 people are conservative media, but Maggie Haberman from the Times is on line 1, he's going to take her call. Trump just wants credibility with the mainstream press. He says they're the enemy, but if you look at the major interviews, it's ABC, it's NBC, it's the New York Times. He prefers them over even conservative media. He wants that legitimacy. He wants, to be in the club, so to speak. And so he will always favor these enemies over his own.
That's love-hate. Yeah, very fascinating. Great episode, guys. Carl, Jeremy, I thought this was a great conversation. Thank you both.
Our panel featured Louis Miranda, former Obama White House communications advisor and former spokesperson at DHS, Carl Meacham, former Clinton appointee and a former senior Republican staff on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Jeremy Murphy, former CBS executive, author, and publicist.